Hello everyone, and welcome back to Instant Release. Let's say that with the spring and summer coming around, you want to buy a camera, a real camera, and you don't want to have something that is too expensive, so maybe under 400 bucks of budget when it comes to the camera body. Maybe you want to have something that is pretty nice looking, maybe a little bit retro, and you don't want to have something that is large like this. If you do your research carefully, you might stumble onto two camera bodies which are being recommended by a lot of people. And these cameras are the Olympus E-M5 Mark II and the Fujifilm X-T1. And then you do a little bit more research on those two camera bodies and you're like a bit more confused because the spec sheets on both of those cameras is very similar. They both are weather sealed and metal construction. They both have similar EVFs. They both have 16 megapixel sensors. They both can do 1080p video up to 60 frames per second. They both don't really have super accurate autofocus, and a lot of people are talking about that. So you might have more questions than going in. So I'm making this video to compare those two cameras, to give you some pointers to maybe go towards the X-T1 or the E-M5 Mark II, and to clear up the confusion between these two cameras that are being recommended left and right. So let's get into it. First of all, I need to talk about the age of these cameras and when they were released. What were they? The X-T1 was released first in 2014, and when it was released it was the Fujifilm flagship, meaning it was the highest end Fujifilm that you could buy at the time, and it was a bit of a success that sparked, the X-T2, X-T3, X-T4 that we know, but the X-T1 was quite a bit different because it didn't have any of the hybrid capabilities that the X-T2, 3, 4, and 5 had, and it was really more of a test run, I would say, when it comes to professional cameras. It only has one card slot. It's not really super accurate when it comes to autofocus. We're going to talk about that later, but basically it was the best Fujifilm had to offer in 2014, and it's still a pretty good camera today. The E-M5 Mark II, on the other hand, already had pretty steep competition in the Olympus camera lineup at the time. It was not the equivalent of the X-T1, it was a notch below that, but it was released in 2015, 1 year later. The Olympus flagship of the time was the E-M1, which was released I think in 2013, or about the same time, just a little bit before the X-T1 actually, but when you look at those two cameras side by side, they are very much the same kind of build quality, same kind of performance, same kind of features, kind of. So to me, they are very comparable cameras. You will see a lot of comparison of the X-T1 versus the E-M1, which has some perks of its own, but the E-M1 is a bit larger camera, has larger grip, does not handle the same way. And in my opinion, the E-M5 Mark II makes a lot more sense when we are comparing it to the X-T1. Okay, so enough when it comes to the context of the release and everything. The E-M5 was cheaper than the X-T1 was when it was released, but nowadays you can find them both for between 350 to 400 bucks. It depends on the market and local markets. I bought my X-T1 for I think 280 bucks, and you can sometimes find some X-T1s around those price ranges, but the condition of the camera is going to be worse. And for the E-M5 Mark II, the same situation applies. Maybe the cheapest I've seen was around 290, 300, but then again, the condition is going to worsen the lower end price you get. That's normal, that's the second-hand market. Okay, so let's start with the differences that we have between these two cameras, and the most obvious difference there is when it comes to the specs is that in the X-T1 we have an APS-C sensor, whereas in the E-M5 Mark II we have a Micro Four Thirds sensor. So when they're side by side like that, they don't look like they have such a difference, in sensor size. However, it is worth mentioning that the smaller sensor of the E-M5 II is going to have a harder time in lower light when it comes to high ISOs. It's also going to have a bit lower dynamic range compared to the X-T1. I would consider the sensor in the X-T1 to still be very decent, even in today's environment when it comes to cameras, simply because it has decent dynamic range, decent noise performance, and the resolution, thanks to the X-T1 technology, which removes the anti-aliasing filter. The resolution, even if it's only 16 megapixels, it's still able to get some very detailed images, and to me that's plenty good enough for pretty much everybody, especially if you are starting out and you want your first camera. This is pretty much this is pretty much the sweet spot when it comes to performance and the amount that you're paying. So you can always look for 24 megapixel cameras like the A6000, but they are much different cameras from what the X-T1 and the E-M5 is. Oh, sorry. The E-M5 on the other hand, it has an anti-aliasing filter, so even though it's still 16 megapixels, it's going to be a bit less sharp than the X-T1. It's very marginal, but you will sometimes see it in stuff like foliage or hair, stuff like that, so that's something to keep in mind. It's very minor difference to me. It doesn't make it's not a make or break decision. And of course, this smaller sensor is going to mean lower dynamic range, so in high contrasted situations, in good light, for example, for landscapes and stuff like that, you will not be able to pull out as much detail from the shadows, and you will not be able to conserve as much highlight detail as well. So that's a limitation of the smaller sensor. However, I would say that it's still good enough, and I wasn't personally limited when I did photography with the E-M5 Mark II, so that's something to keep in mind as well. The E-M5 on the other hand has one very big ace up its sleeve, and that's IBIS. It has sensor stabilization, whereas the X-T1 does not. And subsequently, not all Fujifilm lenses are stabilized. Typically, none of the prime lenses, if you want to have small lenses like this, none of them are stabilized. The only way you could get stabilization on the X-T1 is to get a zoom lens like this, which has OIS. If that's not your cup of tea, I know that's not mine personally, then you're going to have a bit of a problem with the X-T1 in low light. Whereas on the E-M5 Mark II, you don't have to worry about that, because even if you have a ton of very small lenses like this which don't have OIS at all, you have sensor stabilization, so you really don't care. So, in low light, the E-M5 is going to have a bit of an advantage. That is, if there is no movement. If there is movement, stabilization will not help you. It will never help you, no matter the camera system. But if there is no movement, like if you're trying to get a cityscape at night or something like that, or you're trying to get some low light picture of a car standing or something like that, you will have the ability to hold the shutter for a much longer period of time. And I'm not saying that just because it has stabilization and you have that ability, but the image stabilization inside the E-M5 too is extremely good, and I can personally hold shots with sharp results with that 20mm lens, so 40mm equivalent, up to about 1 second, which is actually pretty impressive. So in lower light, the E-M5 is going to be a better camera, unless there is movement. If there is movement, then the X-T1 is going to fare a little bit better, thanks to the wider, like the larger sensor area, meaning that you will have the ability to push the ISO a bit further when it comes to noise. It is worth mentioning though that the X-T1 is limited to 6400 ISO natively. If you want to go further, you will have to use JPEG files, which are not great if you want to post-process them, whereas the E-M5 has more noise, even at 6400 ISO, but you can push it in RAW up to 25,600, which is pretty cool, in my opinion. Even though the image quality is not great, you have the ability to push those files a bit further and to still put them into your average photo editing software to edit them, apply your noise reduction and everything. So that's another bonus for the E-M5 when it comes to low light. Another bonus of the E-M5 for low light comes to the feature set of that camera, and that's tied to the several computational modes that this camera has. It has the lifetime and life bulb, which basically take out the guessing work you have to do when you do long exposure stuff. Like you say, like you tell yourself, oh, I'm going to take a 30-second exposure. You realize it's overexposed. You turn that down to 25 seconds and you redo it. This is removing that whole process, that whole step in the process with the E-M5 2. You just have to press the button, you see the image like built on the screen, and when it's fine, you press the button again and it stops the, it closes the shutters. That's good. Another feature that the E-M5 2 has is related to light painting. That's the live composite mode. I already talked about both of those things in my E-M5 2 review. By the way, I have dedicated reviews to both of those cameras on my channel, so if you want to go check them out, I go a bit more in detail about these cameras. But yeah, the E-M5 2 is very good in low light, whereas the X-T1 is just average. So that's one thing. But when it comes to pure image quality, the sensor performance, the X-T1 is going to win because it has a larger sensor and it has a sharper image at the end, even though it's the same resolution, so that's good. Now, let's talk about autofocus and performance, and there again, there are a lot of similarities between these two cameras. The X-T1 is going to be able to shoot up to 8 frames per second with a pretty decent buffer on it, which is not the case of the E-M5 2. It's going to be able to shoot up to 10 frames per second, but so that's better than the X-T1 in theory, but that's with a locked focus and that's with a very short buffer, so it's not super useful. The only way that you're going to be able to have continuous focus, but in burst mode, is going to be with the 5 frames per second burst, so that's quite a bit slower than what the X-T1 is able to do. And then this is further amplified by the fact that if you want to have focus confirmation before taking the shot in the E-M5 2, because it has a contrast detection system only, you will go down to like 3 or 2 frames per second if there is something moving in the frame that you want to track. So that's something that you need to keep in mind with the E-M5 2. It's really not a camera that is made for moving subjects. It can capture them, but you will have to do it with that lower burst rate. It's accurate, it does the job when it comes to moving subjects, like slow moving subjects in street photography, for example. But for like fast action, no, just this is not the camera made for that. The X-T1 is a bit more able in that regard, meaning it has phase detection autofocus in the center of the frame. It has up to 8 frames per second with continuous focus, which is nice. Though the autofocus is not the most responsive, so it's much better than the E-M5 2 in my opinion, but it's still not perfect. It's not what a camera that even a camera that would consider to be pretty old, like the X-T2. The X-T2 is much better for like following subjects around than the X-T1 is, but the X-T2 is much more expensive, so that makes sense. But yeah, neither of those cameras are good for moving subjects or tracking things around or sports photography or wildlife photography, then that's okay, that's absolutely normal. This is not what they were designed for. However, if you really want to have the camera with the best autofocus out of those two, the X-T1 is going to be the camera that you want to get. Okay, last thing I want to talk about when it comes to specs and technical stuff, before we move on to the handling, because that's the biggest difference between these two cameras, is the video performance. And the video performance, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the video performance between these two cameras on paper sounds extremely similar, because they both can do 1080p 60 frames per second, they both have microphone inputs, and if you don't hold them and use them, you will have a very hard time saying which one is better. So, let's get to the chase. The X-T1 is the worst camera here, and that's not close. Let's start with the very obvious thing. It has a tilt screen, so you won't be able to see yourself if you want to film yourself on travel, for example. So that's the first point. Second, the microphone input is a 2.5mm jack, which is combined with a remote port. So you will need an adapter, and the preamps that are behind that jack are absolutely fucking garbage, meaning that you will have hissing noises with like cold microphone and everything, and with hot microphones it will saturate instantly. It's not a very good experience recording sound with this, and actually the internal microphones are quite a bit more usable. So, and they're not great. So, that for recording sound with the X-T1, this is really not the camera to do that stuff with. And when it comes to the video itself, the video is not good at all. You don't have any kind of dynamic range in this thing. You will always have clipped highlights and very noisy shadows. And what's what's worse really is that you don't have any control over your video. It's always going to be in automatic. You don't have control over your autofocus, your color profile, your shutter speed, or the aperture. I think you have control over that, but the point I'm making is that it's a very amateur video suite, and it's not going to be any good even for casual video. You're going to be disappointed with what the X-T1 is able to do, and your run-of-the-mill smartphone is going to be better. So avoid the X-T1 if what you want to do is hybrid shooting with a bit of video involved, even if it's just a little. And if it's something that your smartphone can't take charge of, well, the X-T1 is probably not the camera for you. On the other hand, the E-M5 II is quite a competent package for video. Not only does it have a fully articulating screen so you can see yourself, it's also just simply more practical for video usage. It also has a proper 3.5mm jack on the side here with proper preamps behind it, so sound capture is not too much of an issue. And you have a full manual control mode on that camera. You even have a flat profile if you want to keep most of the dynamic range that the camera can capture. You don't have a lock profile or anything like that. It's still 8-bit video, 1080p, so it's not something incredible or anything like that, but it's at least usable. The sound is decent, the autofocus is actually not too bad, and you have control over it. You have control over your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, and your color profile as well. So to me, the E-M5 II, that's not even in competition with the X-T1, and that's just with the basic controls of a camera shooting video. That's not even that's not even like high-end features that I'm asking from a camera. It's just basic control, and the X-T1 doesn't have that. The E-M5 II does, and I haven't even talked about the fact that the camera has IBIS and electronic stabilization, which are very good, and you can basically use that camera without a gimbal, without having like a lot of shakes and everything. And it's wonderful video IBIS. This has become my go-to vlogging camera. I used my Z6 before, which has IBIS and electronic stabilization as well, but it's worse on my Z6 than it is on my E-M5 II, so that should give you an idea. Okay, so that's it when it comes to specs and everything. Now I want to talk about the handling differences, because this is really where we're going to see the biggest difference, and this is really where most of the choice when it comes to which camera you want to get to is going to be made. It's here, okay? So let's start with the X-T1. First of all, I do not consider the X-T1 to be particularly retro looking. It's a nice camera, it's a classic camera, don't get me wrong, but to me it's not really retro. Remove the top dials, replace them with like the controls which are already here. Just put a PSAM dial on top here and change the logo in the front. That's a Sony A7. Not particularly retro or anything, it's classy, but it's not a retro looking camera. You are much less prone to be recognized in the street as someone that has a film camera with this kind of thing, compared to the E-M5 II. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the X-T1 to me is not really a retro-looking camera, if you really want that. If you want a retro-looking Fujifilm, I would steer you towards the X Pro series. They are much more retro-looking than that. That being said, the X-T1 is to me a retro-handling camera. Because we have those top dials, basically we have the same controls on the top plate here, and as we do, the camera can focus on that. We have the same type of controls here as we do on the film camera. We have our shutter speed dial, our ISO dial, exposure compensation, aperture ring on the lens, and we even have a tilt screen if you want to emulate a bit of a waist level viewfinder. So that's really a filmic experience when it comes to handling, not really when it comes to looking, you know. It also has lots of like nice little things. It has a ton of customizability when it comes to the back buttons. It has like little, those things like the sub dial for the metering, the sub dial for the drive dial here, and you have the EVF, which is the better EVF out of both cameras. Like the X-T1 has the better EVF over the E-M5 Mark II. It's OLED, it's a bit larger, much better contrast ratio. It's just the better EVF, even though the EVF in the E-M5 II, it's not bad by any means, but the X-T1 is better on that regard, and it's much closer to what you would see in real life when it comes to contrast and everything. So it has a better EVF, it has a better screen for photography-centric experience, and it handles really like a retro film camera, which is really nice actually. So that's to me, the X-T1 is the symbolization of substance over style when it comes to a retro camera. It's actually a better retro experience. So editing me, I completely forgot to talk about another aspect of the X-T1 which is worth mentioning, especially when it comes to beginners with the first camera, and that's the fact that even though both cameras have good JPEG profiles, the X-T1 has film simulations, and I think that as far as JPEG profiles go, they are probably the most easy to use, and especially if you want to have like nice results without any editing, you can like pick up some recipes online on websites like FujiX Weekly, which are going to give you a good like result straight out of camera, which will not have to go through any kind of Lightroom editing or anything like that. And that will help considerably, especially if you want to start editing your files at some point and you realize that you have a base to work on with those film simulations. So just a little point in favor of the X-T1. Back to the video. Okay, so how is the E-M5 II different from the X-T1? Well, first of all, the shape. The shape is absolutely different, and if I put my old film SLR next to it, you will see very, very quickly, if the camera can focus on it, oh no, you can see very, very, very quickly that this is a similar kind of shape, you know? And this is not an accident. Olympus is known for their film cameras in the 80s and 70s. And they made cameras that looked exactly like this, like the OM1, OM2, 3 and 4, like they were like just like that. When it comes to the shape of the EVF housing, it really looks like there is a pentaprism in there, like the little bit of an indentation in the front, which symbolizes a mirror box, even though that's a mirrorless camera, there's nothing of the sort in here. So from a distance, in my opinion, the E-M5 II is much more prone to be recognized as a film camera. However, the illusion completely breaks when you get closer or when you get behind it. First of all, we don't have retro dials on top at all. We have a PSAM dial and command dials and function buttons. And we don't have that shutter speed dial, ISO dial, and everything. In the back, we have a little mode switch here, but we most importantly have that fully articulating screen. So if you want to have that waist level viewfinder experience that we kind of have with the tail screen of the X-T1, this is tough luck, you don't have it here. The ability to see yourself means that you don't have the ability to emulate that kind of waist level viewfinder. And also, I didn't really talk about this with the X-T1 handling, but one particularity of the X-T1 which I quite like, and that's the same thing with most Fujifilm cameras, is that you have very little menu diving, because you have a lot of physical control. You have your, as I said, the drive dial, the metering dial, the autofocus switch in the front. All of this allows you to not have to open a menu to change a setting, just have to push a switch, push a button. It's always nice to have that kind of thing. On the E-M5 II, every button will open a sub-menu or something like that, and if you want to change something like basic adjustment like the autofocus mode or the drive dial, this will always happen in the super control panel. If the camera can focus again, please, come on man. Okay, so this is the super control panel right here, and this is where everything happens on that camera. The autofocus mode, the drive mode, the type of shooting, the shutter type, everything. This is very good. This is pretty much one of the best quick menu systems I've had the pleasure to use on any camera system. Even my Nikon is not as good as this when it comes to direct control, but that's still opening a menu, removing your eye from the viewfinder to change something. It's not retro at all, it's very modern, I would say, and the E-M5 II is a very modern handling camera, even though it looks like a retro one from a distance. So If the X-T1 was substance over style, to me the E-M5 is style over substance, because when it comes to being a retro camera, it's not really a retro handling camera at all. So to me, this is the biggest difference there is between these two cameras, and this is most likely to be the one that will dictate your buying process. Because if you want to have a photocentric camera that handles like a film camera, and you want to have that tactile experience, that hands-down experience on the camera, the X-T1 is going to be the clear choice over the E-M5 too, no matter the other spec differences. However, if you don't care about that, I would say that the E-M5 is a bit of a better deal when it comes to the functionality, the things it can do, the video capabilities, the IBIS. The image quality difference is there, but it's not enough for me to make a substantial difference when you are actually editing the files and posting the files and printing your files. Like, it's not going to be so much of a difference that it makes you buy the X-T1 over the E-M5 if you don't care about the retro handling part of the X-T1. You know, that no one, see what I mean? Also, there is something that we need to talk about before we end this thing, which is talk about the value, and value means also talking about lenses. Fujifilm side of things, lenses are generally pretty decent situation. You have those very nice little Fujicrons, like those f2. The camera can't focus on anything if it's not my face. Cool. But yeah, you have those like little f2 weather-sealed metal build with after rings lenses, which are very sharp and not too expensive. The problem is that you don't have a ton of them. You have the 16 2.8, 23 f2, 35 f2, 50 f2, and that's basically it. Every other XF lens, if it has weather sealing, if it's a prime lens, it's going to be expensive as fuck. And I'm not being dramatic here. Like, even the older ones, like the very first wave of Fujifilm prime lenses, like the 18 f2, the 35 1.4, and even the 60 2.4 macro, all of those lenses are going to be $400 at least. Maybe the 18 f2 is going to be a bit more affordable than that, maybe 300, 330. 300 is like a very good price for an 18 f2, I feel like, but I'm mostly seeing them around 400. So that's not especially affordable. On the macro four thirds side of things, however, you have a ton of small and affordable lenses. Typically, this 20mm f1.7 is one of the best lenses I've ever used when it comes to sharpness. It's extremely sharp. Not very fast focusing, it's not weather sealed, it's a bit plastic, but it's very, 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 very sharp. And it's only $200. And that's the most expensive lens I own in that system. I have the 14mm 2.5, which is pretty good, pretty sharp, extremely small, and it costs like what, $130? If you want to get a small zoom, I have the 35-100, also very sharp. It's a f45.6, so it's not particularly wide aperture or anything like that, but it has image stabilization. It's very fast focusing. It's super, super sharp, and it cost me $110. If you want to have a portrait lens, you have the 45 1.8, which is also plastic, not weather sealed. It focuses pretty well, it has great optical quality, and it cost me $134. I think that you're getting my point when it comes to macro four thirds lenses. They are more numerous, they are cheaper. On the other hand, if you are putting your foot in a system, you're putting your foot in a door to get into it, I think Fujifilm has more potential because they have better lenses, period. You have very good, very, very, very good lenses on macro four thirds, but they are going to be bigger and sometimes, almost all the time, more expensive than their equivalents in the Fujifilm system. If you, on the Olympus side of things, if you want to get the 40-150 f2.8, this lens is super expensive and it's going to be more expensive than the 50-140 f2.8 on the Fujifilm system. Also, the the high-end prime lenses on Fujifilm, like the 1.4 LMWR series, you can find them used for like $500-600 now, which is a very good value because these lenses are magnificent when it comes to optical quality. If you want to get something like that, with the same kind of performance, with weather sealing, great build quality and everything, you will have to look at 1.2 glass on the macro four thirds side of things. And whether it be Lumix or Olympus, they are going to be extremely expensive. They are going to be the same size or larger, and they are sometimes going to have more compromises than what Fujifilm is able to do. So it's a bit of a balance, right? Fujifilm does not have a ton of affordable glass. They have affordable zooms, they have single affordable prime lens, which is 35 f2. There's a lot of uh, third-party lenses that you can get from TT Artisan, from Samyang, from Seven Artisans, which are good enough to go on those cameras. However, if we stay with first-party glass, Fujifilm is going to be expensive, and expensive means that we're also going to have a bit more potential when it comes to higher-end lenses down the line if we choose to go that route. On the Micro Four Thirds side of things, we have, in my opinion, more comprehensive, more complete lens system, which will lead to a bit of a better, I would say that, a bit of a better scalability. When it comes to getting into a system, you start with affordable cameras and affordable lenses, then you move to mid-range cameras and mid-range lenses, and then maybe later you will maybe go to high-end cameras and high-end lenses. Maybe, probably not. That's with Fujifilm. You don't have much choice. It's either you go super budget or high end. There is no like mid range besides the Fujicrons, which are like full lenses and not especially covering all the use cases either. So, it's really two different systems with two different ideologies when it comes to lens releases, in my opinion. And this is something that needs to be at the back of your mind when you are shopping for those two cameras. Now, I will not say which is the camera that I prefer, because I have both of them and I love both of them almost equally, but I will say that I think the E-M5 II is a bit more versatile and a bit more capable on the field, because of the IBIS, because of the fully articulating screen, because of the video performance, because of all of that. I think the E-M5 II is a bit of a more versatile camera. However, the X-T1 is definitely the most enjoyable camera out of those two. So when it comes to price, they are both about the same thing. Now, if you don't care about build quality, if you don't care about a lot of physical controls, if you don't care about weather sealing, there are cheaper options. So on the Fujifilm side of things, there are not a ton of cheaper options. There is only really the X-T10, which is maybe $50 to $100 cheaper than the X-T1, which is a good camera and I like it. But if you want to get any of the older cameras than the X-T10 and the X-T1, like the X-E2, the X-E2 is surprisingly expensive for what it is, and the X-E1 is the same story and it's even less performance. And X Pro 1, it's about 50% more expensive than an X-T1 if you want to get one. And the XM1 is really a budget camera at this point and less performance in pretty much everywhere that compared to the X-T1, and still pretty expensive as well. So besides the X-T10 on the Fujifilm side of things, you don't have much alternatives. On the Olympus side of things, you do have the E-M10 series, like the E-M10 and the E-M10 Mark II, which are both going to be less expensive than the E-M5 Mark II. You also have the original E-M5, but the original E-M5 has some compromises which I'm not exactly happy to make. Typically, I haven't talked about this, but this goes into the Olympus being a more modern camera. This has a very good Wi-Fi app, which is still modern, which is still it's the latest OM system app, which the E-M5 II is still supported in it. Looking at you, Fujifilm, that released the X app when it's no support for camera with Wi-Fi and don't have Bluetooth, like the X-T1 for example. So if you want to have Wi-Fi with the X-T1, you will have to go with that older dog shit app. So that's something to keep in mind. But the E-M5 II has a very nice little app that works fine. The E-M5, which is from 2012, doesn't have access to that wireless connectivity at all. So you don't have access to the electronic shutter either. You still have 5-axis image stabilization, and you have basically the same image quality. You don't have the live composite mode, but you have the lifetime mode, so I guess that's okay. The camera is much less expensive though. It's more like in the $200, $250 sometimes, and you still have the metal build quality, you still have the weather sealing, but the viewfinder is worse. Honestly, if you want to get a less expensive Olympus camera, I would highly recommend you look either at the E-M10, which has the Wi-Fi, the live composite, and everything, and the only thing the E-M10 is lacking is really the electronic shutter, or better yet, the E-M10 Mark II, which even has an OLED viewfinder, which none of the other cameras I've talked about so far have, like besides the Fujifilm with our all OLED screens, but the Olympus cameras, none of them have an OLED viewfinder except the E-M10 II for some reason, but you know what, whatever. The E-M10 II to me is a good sweet spot because it has all the features that I talked about from the E-M5 Mark II. You just leave on the table the weather sealing, and the full autoclaring screen. So if you don't like the full autoclaring screen and you don't care about not having weather sealing, the E-M10 Mark II is probably the better camera to buy, and it's substantially less expensive than the E-M5 at maybe the most expensive one I've seen have been around $300. So if you want to get, if you are okay with shopping on used cameras that have a bit of mileage on them, you might be able to find an E-M10 Mark II for $250 maybe, which is a good deal in my opinion. Okay, that's about everything I wanted to say about potential camera buyers that would be in search of a retro-ish camera for the spring of this summer for travel and stuff. If you have any questions about these two cameras, and if I can answer, I will be pleased to answer if you post them down below in the comment section. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.